What are your conclusions after all of this exploration? And I think that was the thing that I found most shocking about the Nexium doc was it went counter to who I would imagine would be susceptible to such a thing. Almost without exclusion, all the Nexium followers were like incredibly bright, industrious, motivated, conscientious, like dream employees. And I think a lot of us think you'd have to be stupid to fall for this, but I think you definitely have the goal in the book of pointing out, like, really, this could happen to anyone.
A lot of people have that thought, I would never join a cult, or people who join cults are stupid. I completely understand why people have that thought because it's very comforting.
Yeah.
And it really makes you feel safe, and it really makes you feel in control, which is something that every human wants.
Yes.
And at the same time, you know, when I started reporting on this group, it's not like I was a cult expert. Now I feel like I've done a lot of research and I kind of understand both this group and then like broad patterns generally. And I think I would say that it's not about smarts. It's about your yearning and your seeking. And everyone has something that they are looking for. And if that right match finds you at the right time in your life, when you are maybe having just gone through some sort of life transition, or you moved to a new city, or you went through a divorce, or anything like that, you are at heightened vulnerability. So I think that some people are more vulnerable than others, but I do not agree that there are people out there who are like totally immune to this risk.
I agree.
And I think having some humility about that is actually probably protective.
Yeah.
Because if you assume that this will never happen to you, you might not recognize it when it does. And cults look different now than they did 40 or 50 years ago. And I don't mean to be like fear-mongering, but it's just more about understanding that, like, by nature, humans are searching for things. And I think, like, if someone promises an answer, that's like a very tantalizing thing. One of the major things that I found interesting about researching and understanding One Taste is just how much status games play a role in why people did certain behaviors within the group.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, if you become really emotionally invested in a fairly tight-knit social circle with unusual rules and a very clear hierarchy and a pretty clear norm of what's accepted and approved of behavior and disapproved of behavior, you are going to make decisions that are in line with that set of social pressures rather than, you know, your own moral compass. Like, your moral compass goes out the window.
Well, your moral compass was set by your peers already.
Yeah,
That's how we work.
there's no objective, you know.
No.
So people, like, you know, observers will look at some of the choices that people made when they were inside One Taste, and they might judge, and they might say, I would never do that.
Yeah.
I would never agree to that kind of arrangement, or I would never, like, you know, stand by while my friend was being, like, punished for something.
Yeah.
But again and again, I spoke to people who said, like, well, I did it because I knew it was going to get me approval. I did it because people who were higher status than me in the group told me that that's what I needed to do. I did it because I knew they would like me more if I did it. I didn't say anything because I was afraid I would get punished if I spoke up.
Yeah.
Guess what? Like, that's why
we do everything.
That's why we do everything. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That is a lesson, you know, set aside, like, might I be tricked into a cult or whatever? Like, set that aside. That can, you know, that is an interesting lesson to try to, like, reflect on. But more so than that, it's like in your daily life, it is interesting to try to be aware of how frequently you are making decisions, based on, like, wanting approval or status or avoiding disapproval or pain or, Yeah,
we're all really super susceptible to our context, and we act in accordance with whatever our chosen group is.
And what's interesting is I read a book, the author has passed away, but she wrote this kind of seminal book about cult behavior. One of the things that really stuck with me is she said, we're such finely tuned social creatures that we don't even need to be told what the rules are.
Yeah.
We are so good at looking around and just inferring what we should be doing. And within One Taste, Nicole rarely commanded. She would just praise someone in a very targeted way if they did what she wanted, or she would ignore or like look poorly on someone who didn't do what she wanted, that is more effective than telling someone you need to do this thing.
And that's where it gets so tricky criminally for all these different things, because everyone's consenting, you know, in whatever broad definition you have of consent.
I mean, legally they're consenting.
At the trial, the defense attorneys would often cross-examine witnesses and ask them questions like, well, maybe they didn't use these exact words, but the suggestion was someone holding a gun to your head?
Yeah, were you punished
were
for not
you
doing
locked in a room?
Yeah, exactly.
Or could you have walked away?
Yeah.
What they're suggesting there, in my opinion, is that implicit pressure doesn't exist.
Look, it's a tricky one because we all want liberty.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we got to draw these really tenuous lines.
Someone at trial said something that I think sums it up really well. This was like a former One Taste member, and he said on the stand, if you can't freely say no, then you can't freely say yes, and therefore you can't consent. So that is one framework to think about it, which is that if someone said yes, but the environment is such that a reasonable person would agree that there was not room to say no.
Yeah. Is it
yes? Is that still yes?
Yeah.
And I don't know that, like, as a society, we've come to a clear conclusion on that. But that's a central question that was coming up at trial. That's been on my mind.
Yeah. But then you get into like, okay, then what's the line? So a guy who joins a gang and it's pretty implicit, not stated, you should kill members of the opposing gang. Is that person not have any responsibility because they were? So it's like, that's why it's murky, and that's why it's really hard. That's why these can exist, because we all do want liberty in our...
Like many things, there's not an easy answer.
Yeah.